What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and we're back for another episode of the 3D Fighter. So the 3D Fighter is an extension of our fighting game tutorial series where we implement 3D mechanics that you would see in games like Tekken, Dead or Alive, and others like that. So when we come into the game here, we start in our 2 and 2.5D fighter mode, and everything is working like usual. Then as we've implemented in this mini-series, we have a cheat or a console command that we can trigger called cheat enable 3D mode. We can set that to true, which enables the 3D fighter. Now you'll see this character turn the opposite direction because as we rotate around our characters, that is what the camera would see, right? If the camera was behind me, the character that you now see on the left would have that spike arm toward the camera, which is what the character on the right has. So this is actually working. This is as expected. The character was rotated in place, and now the characters are looking at each other. This is one thing I showed a hacky fix for at the end of the previous episode, and today we're going to make it so that every time we enable this mode, it's going to properly rotate the character like that, which is nice. And then another fix that we have in today's episode is now I can walk into my character without going off in a different direction once I cross sides, which is a bug that was present in the previous episode. I can still walk into them and rotate around them, which is something else we can fix. As long as I can rotate and move freely now without going off in a different direction, you'll know that the logic in today's episode has worked, and you'll see that we can do that. So once we get our movement done here, then we have one other issue to fix, and then we can finalize our 3D camera for our fighting game. Now today's episode specifically is supposed to be just general improvements for the 3D fighter. Really, we're just fixing these issues that we saw. That way we make sure everything works properly. That way when we go to implement other features, we don't have to deal with these existing bugs that we are aware of. Now another thing, we can actually disable the 3D mode and it will generally work. You'll see that the camera is slightly off. The camera needs to be updated when we change this mode as well, because it thinks everything is set up properly, and going from 2D to 3D it is, but there's some things we need to reset when we go back, or when we're going to swap back and forth. Before we hop into the episode, if you want to get caught up in the series, things like how we did our projectiles, our hit effects, our round timer, our console commands, and a whole lot more, I'll link you to the entire playlist right here in the top right corner so that you can see how we've done all of that. And we have new episodes every single Sunday. Alternatively, if you don't care about that and you only care about the 3D fighter, you don't have to watch all the episodes of the 2 and 2.5D fighter to follow along, although they are helpful. But I do recommend that you watch at least the previous episodes of the 3D fighter before implementing this episode, as all of the 3D fighter episodes are building on top of each other. So if you watch that one, I'll link it right here, then you'll be able to follow along with this one a lot more easily when you get here. So with that said, we can go ahead and get started. Now this is a code and blueprint tutorial series, but we're going to be doing everything in the code today. So let's hop right into it. I'm here in my code. This is my fighter template character class, which is my base character, or the parent character to all my other characters in the game. The first thing I want to do is fix that issue where walking into our character was causing the character to start moving the opposite direction. I would be holding the right direction, for example, and I would intersect with my second character, and as I'm about to touch them, I start rotating ever so slightly toward them, and since I'm doing that, the movement was being applied on the same axis, even though that wasn't the direction the character was facing. And because of that, we kept moving in the same direction, even though we were facing the other direction now. So we were holding right, but moving left. And that should not be the case. We need to move in the direction we're facing in the 3D fighter. So to do this, I want to go down to my move right function. Now this move right function is a beast, and it is one of the things that's getting cleaned up in the main series, but luckily we don't have to interact with any of this prior to cleaning it up, except for toward the very bottom when we actually apply our movement. It's right here. I commented out the line and replaced it with this logic, but I want to make it very apparent what I was changing in today's episode. So we had one line here, which was adding movement input on the y-axis, and it was taking the value of the function. That is what input we added, so if we press left or right, we would move this way. However, we don't really want to do this now. We need to factor in the direction the character is looking, and since the characters orbit and rotate toward each other, they could be moving right or left, but also forward and backward. This technically accounts for up and down as well. You're usually on the same level when you're standing. If you needed to look up a hill or a staircase or something, it would technically work. But mainly we just care about forward, backward, left, and right. An easy way to accomplish this is to take out this line or just replace this line with the logic that I have here. So this is the move right function, and everything that's in move right is still occurring. Instead of just forcing movement on the y-axis, we can get the actor's forward vector, which is the vector that the character is facing, so what is directly in front of them. basically draw a line there, and that will be our forward vector. So if base game instance is fighter mode 3D. Now base game instance is our game instance type. We have a U base game instance class that tracks everything in our project that we need to persist between levels. And one of these things is if the fighter mode is 3D, if we're playing a 3D fighter. Higher up in this function, at the very top, I get this variable, if auto base game instance equals cast U base game instance, and I'm casting get game instance. So get the game instance, cast it to our type, set it to this variable. I need to check that to see if we're in 2D or 3D fighter mode and then act accordingly. So using this variable that we created, we know it's valid because we put it in an if statement. Then we're checking the is fighter mode 3D, which again just checks if we're a 3D fighter or 2D fighter mode right now. So if we're in 3D fighter mode, we want to use the actor's forward vector, add the movement that way. Else, this means we're a 2D fighter or 2.5D fighter, which means we can just use the old logic we were using where we assume we only want to move on the y-axis at the given value. And we can add some comments here. Add movement on the y-axis. Add movement in the direction the character is facing. Then we can get rid of all of this. You don't need these. I just put this here as a marker so that I could find it in this function and you know exactly what changed. So here's our logic for it, and this is perfect. However, we technically do this for crouching as well because we have the ability to crouch walk, and we do it in two different places here. So we have it here and we have it here. Now again, this can be greatly simplified, and we are simplifying it in the 2 and 2.5D fighter. But for now, we can just make sure it works in 3D. When this gets converted to a simpler, more concise method in the 2 and 2.5D fighter, this will still work. We don't have to worry about changing it later or anything like that. But if you want to support crouch walking in the 2D and 3D fighter, you can copy these lines and just paste them in here. So basically everywhere there was an add movement input, just replaced with these two lines. Now the only difference with the crouch walking is that I multiplied the value coming into the function by 0.5, which means they'll just move at a slower rate. So feel free to copy this just by multiplying value by 0.5f. And then you can get rid of the old one and it will look like this. And then we can copy this and put it here in the last section as well. Remove the old one. And problem solved. So now all of our movement will go in the correct direction when we're in 3D fighter mode. And when we're in 2 and 2.5D fighter mode, it will stay on the y-axis, which is what we expect. So now both cases are accounted for there. The other thing I would like to fix is how the character was rotated the wrong way when swapping to 3D fighter mode. So this was also shown in the previous episode, and I showed a quick fix for it, which was to unflip the mesh. So in the 2 and 2.5D fighter, the way we get the opposing sides is by flipping the mesh. So if we go to the tick function, and I scroll down here to this section where I'm determining what side characters are on. So if it's the 3D fighter, we just rotate the opponents toward each other. If it's the 2D fighter, we come into here, and here we were determining which character was on the left, which character was on the right, and based on that, we were changing some values of the character. We assume in the series that all the characters are going to be by default facing the right. This works, of course, for the first character or the first player when they're on the left side. But for the second character, the second player, when they're on the right side, that doesn't work. And additionally, if you flip sides, they need to be able to swap. So we came up with a very simple method. Grab the character's mesh and invert the scale on the y-axis, which flips the scale. And we do a little bit more than this by changing the hurt boxes and adding an additional offset. If the mesh isn't in the center of the character, we have a lot of functionality in here that we can use, and it all works for 2D. But for 3D, when we swap to 3D, we don't want to have this inverted scale anymore because the characters are rotating toward each other. Which, speaking of, we had this comment in here of how to rotate the characters toward each other. The function we wrote in the series for the 3D fighter that we're literally using right now, the rotate toward opponent 3D, covers this and will work in 2D environments if you want to use the rotation method, which means I'm removing this comment here. That is outdated. We now have our proper method of doing so. But back on topic here, so the 3D rotation doesn't require the scale to be inverted. In fact, this messes it up, and that's why the character was facing the opposite direction when we would turn on 3D mode. And the hack fix that I implemented was to just copy this behavior, change the scale Y to always be 1, and call it whenever we were rotating toward opponent 3D. That gets called every frame and is incredibly nasty. So a much better, much simpler solution is to go into our fighter template game mode.cpp and scroll down to where we enable and disable 3D mode. Now, if you have this as part of your game and it's not only a cheat, I recommend putting this logic in the function where you're changing between 2D and 3D mode. Right now, it's only a cheat for us to change between these modes. There is no intention to change in the middle of a match, although you could. So I'm putting it in here, but just note you may want to move it so it's not in the cheat specifically if you have another place for that. Now if I scroll down here, we were looping through all the characters on each team because this is also a tag fighter. So we have team 1 characters. And when we were looping through them, we were setting our plane constraints, so letting the characters move on certain planes when switching between these modes. And then we were resetting the characters' scale to the default value, specifically their mesh. And the intention here was to fix the problem of the character's mesh being inverted. The thing that I missed though is we need to update the transform. When we just change the scale on the transform and we don't update the transform itself, it's not going to take. And so this isn't really solving the problem that we have. So I've already fixed this. I was showing it to you in the episode, but I fixed it specifically for Team 2 characters. So if we come down here, I can show you what I did. This is our loop where we're going through every character on Team 2, and this is the line I was just telling you about, and I commented this out, and instead I added the logic for this right in here, inside of this if should enable. And what this means is if we are enabling 3D mode, what do we do for each character? So we were setting our plane constraint to plane constraint 3D, and in here we want to reset our scale and undo the mesh flipping. And we can do this by making a transform value, or variable here. So f transform character transform equals team 2 characters at index I, because that's the character that we're currently on. We're going to get their mesh, which just returns the mesh component. Every character should have this. If you want, feel free to check this for validity to make sure that the character has their mesh, but that should be valid. And then we're going to get the relative transform of it, which is just going to get the actual transform of the mesh relative to the owning actor. So this is going to keep all the elements about the transform that were set up in the 2D and 2.5D fighter version. I was mentioning earlier that we have that optional mesh offset if you want to position it differently. So that is going to be added to the transform, and that means this transform will have this. So we're getting the transform that we already have for the character, and we are setting the scale. So character transform.setScale 3D to f vector 1.0, 1.0, 1.0f, or we could just do f vector : 1 vector. Nice and clean. That just does the same thing. It puts 3 ones in there, 1 for each axis. And then I'm going to take team 2 characters at index I, get the mesh again, and call set relative transform and set it to this new transform that we made. This is going to set it back to a default value, undo any mesh flipping, and then we can continue on with the function and do anything else we need in here. We don't want to do it below the if statement here because when we're disabling the 3D fighter, we don't want to force this because they may be the right scale. The tick function in the character class will take care of the rest, but we still have to make sure that we set it correctly initially because we have some optimizations to skip trying to rotate or flip the character's mesh if they're already in the correct orientation. So this means I can remove this line that's commented out right here, and we can copy this and we can paste it in the team 1 for loop. Just remember to remove this line right here as well for the team 1 section, and remember to change your arrays here. So where we're making the transform, we need to use team 1 characters at index I. And then when we're setting the transform, make sure to use team 1 characters at index I here as well. And this will now work for both characters. And there we go. So now if we play this, we should get the results that you saw at the start of today's episode when I was going over the project. So we come into our game here, 2D mode, 2.5D mode works well. We can enable 3D mode. The character flips on the right here, which is expected. And then if I rotate around them, we stay facing each other, great. And then I can walk into them. And again, when I get to them, I am going to start rotating around them a little bit like this. But I am going to keep moving the direction I'm facing, which is really what we want for today's episode. Now, as I mentioned, there is something else I would like to fix, this part right here, where when we walk into them, we should not be rotating around them. We also should really fix our camera boundaries because they don't technically update when we move around like this. They're in a static spot, and they do update when we're getting closer, due to moving left or right. So we can get to a weird state like that where they're technically in the wrong spot and they try and push us out. So we just need to update them with this movement as well. That way they know where to be regardless of orientation. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please subscribe. It does more for myself and the channel than anything else you can do, and I really appreciate it. I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership, Discord subscriptions, and Patreon members. You guys are amazing, and I appreciate you. Thank you for all the love and support. I'm so grateful for it. If you ran into any problems while following this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. There is a link in the description, and I would be happy to help you out. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.